Okay, got a big one lined up for you this week. Essentially what I've got is I discuss some of the mistakes I make at work. I suppose that my character traits around why I made those mistakes, and then what I'm doing to try and make sure I don't repeat those mistakes in the future. And then I kind of move on to talk about hacking your body and your mind. It kind of moves on into sort of talking about old age and death as well. And then I finish up on mistakes again. I suppose my tolerance to mistakes, rather, investing, and also a particular stock that I hold called Paradox. Now, what I've decided to do is just cut it up into 2 chunks because this stretched way over 2 hours. There was a lot to talk about, as it turned out. And please forgive me as well, the first half of this, I sounded very depressed. And the reason for that is, first clip, it was really, really late and I was very, very tired. And I decided to go to bed, record in the morning. And so the second clip, I am still waking up and I sound a bit ill. But, I begin to become a lot more animated as the discussion goes on. But enjoy this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload the next chunk next week. See you then. Okay, so these past couple of weeks have been pretty instructive for me because I have made quite a few mistakes. And the spirit of this channel, I suppose, is that I'm supposed to be sharing those mistakes with you and, sharing my learnings. So this is going to particularly be centered around carelessness. Because I have realized that I am naturally not a very careful person. And I think that probably actually, now I think it shows up in a lot of things, but I mean it particularly in the way that although I do have an ability to have attention to detail, I think that I can get so caught up in trying to do things quickly and efficiently that I can make mistakes, I miss things. And so the example really is that there's a particular client project that I'm working on that I messed up in like a couple of ways. So one of them is basically sending out sort of a list or like a report to a client. There were certain things on there which they sort of made a comment about, and I looked at it and I went, yeah, I should have picked that up. I shouldn't have put that in there. And then the other one is basically I sort of was doing a mass outreach, and in this mass outreach, there were just multiple mistakes that I made where I would put different, I would send, the whole idea is I kind of did a few different templates of this mass outreach with the idea of making it as, as targeted as I could while still keeping it efficient. But there were certain people on that list who I definitely I accidentally put in both lists, so they received two separate, outreaches, and I just looked at it and I kept doing all these mistakes, and I kept writing it down, going, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, and I realized because I guess the pièce de la résistance, if you will, it was me I sent out a very wide outreach with a critical piece of information on it that was incorrect. And don't get me wrong, I don't think it's going to have doomed the project or anything like that. But it wasn't great, and I'm now in sort of, we had to go into crisis mode, and go and try and just deal with it as much as possible. Something I did learn from my boss in that moment was he said, look, with these things, if you make a mistake like this, you can do a lot more damage in trying to repair it than if you just let it lie. And I think that there is truth to that. But I'm also really keen for this client that I want to put in. They don't know that I've made a mistake, but I want to go out and I want to give them my all because I feel like I owe it to them. Because I take my job seriously and I take them seriously. And So yeah, Monday morning is going to be is going to be, I guess, back into full work mode, and I think it'll be fine. But yeah, and then on my other project is going really well, so they balance out, I think. But yeah, so the wider point here is just about carelessness, and I think the fact that I'm so focused on efficiency as well, because there's so much stuff within my job which I look at and I go, okay, this could be automated, or I'm like, not fully automated, but as much as possible, because there's lots of repeat stuff, and that focus on efficiency means that I send out, mistakes get amplified basically, and that you need almost, the more efficient and automated something is, the more you amplify the damage that gets done by a small mistake, because that mistake will get duplicated. And that is something that I have become acutely aware of. And the way that I'm trying to mitigate this now is using checklists. So, I don't want to reinvent the wheel here. It's very famous within the medical profession and within for airline pilots as well, before they take off, that they have a set of checklists that they basically run through the checklist every time, and it's been shown to massively improve safety. And it's something that investors actually use as well, just to make sure that they're making sound decisions. And it's something that I now need to incorporate, and I'm going to start setting up checklists before sort of any crucial task like that, to make sure that I actually have that attention to detail and I fully check everything. Because ultimately a lot of the efficiency and a lot of the measures that I have tried to implement in my job have been to improve my statistics of, my chances of success in everything, and then also to minimize the time it takes to do a given volume of stuff, right? And carelessness reverses all of that and more. So, ultimately, the way I've sort of been thinking about it is, because I've been trying to do things to the highest quality that I can in terms of outreach. So I'll get onto that a little bit later. But because what I thought was, right, quality, making stuff as individuated as possible, it costs a lot of time. But I think it's worth it on the statistics. But then that time is just completely nullified if you are careless, which I have been. So yeah, I'm gonna keep you updated, see how I get around that. But I think it's really important to get an objective understanding of your own behavioral flaws, and to then from that actually start to find ways of hacking that and getting around it. Because ultimately we are who we are, and you've got to learn to live with that and learn to mitigate your worst elements and play to your strengths as much as possible. I think it's a highly underrated skill. Rather than being the best at everything, just figure out what you're good at and get even better at it. Because there are ultimately increasing returns to skill, and I think that that's something that's very important to keep in mind. Because in a world like this, you're measured relative to other people. You're measured relative to everything else, I should say. And if you're 2% better than the average, then it's not that worth it. But if you are twice as good as the average person, you're going to receive far more than twice the remuneration for the work that you do, because that's rare and scarcity sells. And speaking of hacking your mind, I wanted to sort of come back to, I think that there's something that we can learn from old people, and that's not, every time I say something, actually, I always think about it as I say it, and I go, That's just actually not profound at all. It's never ever profound. But hey, this is my diary, so whatever. Yeah, I think that there's something really useful that we can learn from older people, and the context for this is that I went and visited my grandma about a week ago, and she had to pick me up because the car was broken and couldn't drive there. And yeah, she picked me up, and when she parked in her garage, I noticed just this small thing. When I went to open the door, and it was quite tight. And my grandma is not a very mobile woman at this point. So I go to open the door, and normally you've got to make sure you don't bash it on the side. But she has propped up this mat so perfectly against the wall, so that you could whack that door into a cinder block wall, and it's got this really nicely cushioned mat that's just propped up perfectly, so that it would just everywhere that the door would hit normally is hitting a cushioned area. And I was like, that is so smart. Like, that is so smart. And the reason that she obviously needs to do it is because getting out of the car for her, she's not nearly as agile as me, so she doesn't have... For me, I could just not close the door as much and just sort of squeeze out. But for her, that door needs to be opened up as much as it can. And she doesn't have the agility or the dexterity to open the door in a subtler way. And do it I suppose quickly as well. And I looked at that and I went, that's really impressive. That's really smart. And it got me thinking about. So I watched a Daily Journal, the Daily Journal shareholders meeting with Charlie Munger, where it's basically just a Q&A where people ask Charlie Munger questions, and then they kind of do a bit of stuff talking about the Daily Journal as well. Because, yeah, I mean, it's quite funny actually how they've that annual shareholders meeting has been completely co-opted by Charlie Munger. But whatever. Go watch them actually if you haven't. There's a lot of worldly wisdom within there, and the good thing is that people are only asking, like, Warren Buffett isn't there, and it's not that I don't like Warren Buffett or anything. They're both great. It's just that because Charlie Munger is so old, at the, say, Berkshire Hathaway meetings, he doesn't talk nearly as much because he's got to save his stamina, whereas in the Daily Journal meeting it's just him, so he actually does answer all the questions, and it's very refreshing. It's amazing how sharp he is, considering how he is. I don't even know how old. I think he's like late 90s, but he kind of looks like a corpse, to be honest with you. And it's very sad. I think it's almost more sad when you see an old person and you speak to them and they are lucid and they are completely with it, and you're like, yeah, just frail. Like, seeing that frailty is kind of it's a bit, yeah. I mean, it's sad because I maybe I've talked about this before, but yeah, with my grandma, she has definitely aged a lot in the past. Like, in the past few years, she's before that, she basically didn't age for like 20 something years. Like, she just was the same age. I just always remember her she always looked old, but then just sort of never really, like, never too old, sort of like, maybe like 70. She always just looked 70. And then, she's got dementia now. And I don't know, just the past like year, she has aged both mentally but also physically. Like, there is a just certain frailty to her that she didn't have before, which is very sad. And it's horrible to say, but every time I see her now, even though I know it's not true, I always kind of feel like, oh, this could be the last time that I see her, which it's a very depressing thing to think. But I always, because when I look at her and she's going to the doctors like a lot, like pretty much every single day, the doctor wants her to come in because she's got, and this is the issue as well, because she's got dementia. Well, I think it's part of the reason, but she's not able to explain to us like what the issue is, and I've sort of pieced it together because I asked her to sort of walk me through the medication that she was taking and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's quite sad. But I guess the plus side is that I'm really cherishing the time that we have together, where I've been making I mean, I for the past few years, since COVID, I've been calling her once a week anyway, because I've read, I can't remember what book I read. I think it was How to Win Friends and Influence People, or it was either that or The Education of a Value Investor by Guy Spear. And in that, it kind of talks about, it made me think a lot about the kind of person I wanted to be, and whether I wanted to, well, yeah, I guess, like, yeah, it made me think about the kind of person I wanted to be, and made me think more about other people, because, you know, I think I'm naturally selfish, and yeah, I mean, because I'm naturally selfish in that I'm always focused on me. I think we're all naturally selfish, to be honest with you, but I'm always focused on me, sticking in my lane on how to achieve my goals, and I'm really, really focused on that, and that has led, in the past, it's led me to sacrifice relationships in pursuit of the goal, which is actually, I didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't like a conscious decision, because I think that's psychotic. But yes, in hindsight, it cost me. And I sort of started making like conscious decisions of, right, okay, what do I want to do? Okay, well, for example, my grandma, she's probably really lonely, because I've read so much about about loneliness in old people. And I'd sort of gone, wait, so why would my grandma not be lonely? Why is she different from this statistic, And I thought about it, and I went, well, I only see her like once every blue moon. I don't see her very often. I don't know what she does between the times that I see her. And I was like, well, my grandma could be really lonely. So what I did was I went, right, I'm going to see if I give her a ring. And I remember the first time I rang her, we chatted for a little bit, and she said, do you need anything? Like, do you want anything? And I was like, no, I'm just calling to just see how you are, and just chat and just talk to you, really. And like, that made her day, and I could tell over the phone that made her day, and that made it so worth it. Like that, it felt really good. And I think that's the thing, is that you got to think, you're not doing this for other people, you're doing it for you. Like, if I say doing this, I mean, when you help people, at least for me, I think if you think that you're helping people for their sake, I think that's a one-way road to getting some sort of God complex, or just going a bit crazy. But for me, I think I think if you do it from the perspective of, I'm doing this because it makes me feel good, then I think that's actually a route to becoming a much better person. So it did make me feel good. And I still, even to this day, when I've been calling her every week for like 3 years, she still says, you don't have to call me, you don't have to call me, because she's so afraid of being like a burden on anyone, and feeling like, just feeling like that. And that must feel horrible, I can imagine. I'm going to have a drink of my coffee, so I'm going to pause this. But but essentially I've really I'm learning now to sort of cherish every moment that I have with her, and actually to, there's almost a sense of urgency as well, where I want to spend more time with her, because I don't know how much time I have left before it's over, and I do feel, I mean, I do not want my grandma to die. I do not want her to die, but I feel content that if she were to die tomorrow, that I hadn't wasted the past few years, and I would feel like, okay, I built a relationship with her, which I think I didn't, although obviously she's my grandma, I always had like a relationship with her and loved her. Calling her every single week gave me a new relationship with her, and also taught me things about her which I didn't even know before, like stories. Like, for example, there's her dad, my great granddad, basically was in charge of, he sourced wood for the UK during the war, and then and it's important for reconstruction, for building planes as well. And after the war, he wanted her and her mum to stay with him. He was very family oriented and wanted the family to stay together. So he would go around the world sourcing lumber, and he would take them with him. And so he would be on board like these military vessels or whatever, and they would just kind of be there. And she's got some amazing stories of. So she went to Argentina, and there's a guy called Perón, who was basically a populist leader in Argentina, he's kind of, I guess the best equivalent is he's maybe like a Margaret Thatcher or like a Karl Marx or whatever, in terms of like the influence. Maybe Karl Marx isn't a good example, but the influence that he had on the politics of his country. Like there's a whole movement called Peronism, which is like the main party in power currently in Argentina is a Peronist party, and it's built upon his ideology. It's like a sort of a strange sort of, it's unique to Argentina, but it's like a left-wing sort of socialist ideology. And he basically founded that, and he was president. And he had at an opera house a special chair that was almost like a throne to watch the operas. And my grandma, she went on a night out. Like, she never really describes it. She's always very cagey with that sort of stuff because she's very prim and proper. But yeah, she went out with a bunch of the people who were on the ship, and they went to this opera house or whatever. And because she was dared to, she went and sat in his throne. And she watched the opera, just sat in his throne, and it was just like, what the fuck? That man's like a dictator, and you just went and sat in his chair. Like, my grandma had no chill, man. My grandma was she did not give a fuck. But yeah, so I've gone completely off topic. But the other thing that I think the other thing that's good to learn from older people is. It is that hacking of your body, but also hacking of your mind. So something that apparently people who are dementia, and I can see it, but people with dementia are very good at almost concealing it, and not necessarily consciously concealing it, but their mind, because it's within your own brain. Your brain like plasters over any inconsistencies. And what my grandma now does is, when she gets something and she needs to do it later, she just leaves it in like a place. She'll leave it there, and she'll just go off and keep like doing her day. And then she'll come back to it and she'll say, "Oh, why is this here?" Pick it up, have a look. She's like, "Oh, I don't know what this is about." And then she'll be able to piece it together by the fact that she's left it out. And I was like, okay, that's actually quite a smart thing to do. And I just think maybe the fact that she's created all these little hacks for the fact that she's not as mobile, for the fact that she's the fact that she's mentally not as together as she used to be, and she's able to live a much more sort of close to normal existence because she's found these ways of getting around that. And yeah, it's quite interesting. And I think that I kind of forgot to actually, I made a point about Charlie Munger earlier. I think I forgot to actually make the point. I do that quite a lot. But he basically said that as you get older, because somebody quoted him when he, like 20 something years ago, and basically said, "You said that you would not feel happy with somebody who is your age still doing what you do." And he said, "Yes, that is true. I did say that. And the truth is, I do not have the energy that I used to have. But," he said, "as you get older, you come up with ways of doing the same thing. You become a lot wiser with how you expend your energy. And by doing so, you're actually able to be about as effective for much less effort." And I think that, that's something that we could all definitely learn from. I think the other thing you can learn as well is that there is a pride. And my grandma really shows this, where she is too proud to often ask for any help. And she's too proud. So she's at a point where she basically, when she tries to walk, her knees are so stiff that she is like, it hurts. It really hurts her to walk. And if she goes driving, she'll be like, like in pain. When she tries to get out the car, and it's like, and I think I've talked about this before. It's basically because she doesn't move around that much, and so because we've seen that her moving around, although it hurts, her moving around more means that if say we're with her for a few days, by the second or the third day, she's actually much more mobile and doesn't have any of these issues. So it is clearly it's something that's fixable. But regardless, she doesn't want to get, like, she's not able to climb. She really struggles to climb stairs, and yet she lives in a house where she lives upstairs, as in like she's got 2 floors to the house, and she goes to bed upstairs, and I have no idea how she gets upstairs. I think we think that she gets on her ass and goes up backwards, and yeah, I mean, it's not a particularly. It's like, all right, I get you want to do it yourself, but that house literally has the capacity for a stair lift built into it, because it used to have a stair lift before she arrived, and she took out the stair lift, and that's fair enough. She didn't need it then, but now she kind of does need it. And I was trying to sort of gently push it, but it's not something that you want to push too hard, because you don't want to just be like, you're incapable. Like, I wish, that's a horrible thing to say. And also, just because someone's old and is becoming infirm, it doesn't mean that they're not a person, and they still, like, if you just start treating them like, oh, okay, I need to make decisions for you, like that, no one ever likes that. No one ever wants to have decisions made for them, because if you take away that agency, what's the point in, I guess, being alive? What's the point in making your own? Like, it just makes you feel like less than a person. So I've been trying to nudge her towards that, but she just won't do it. She's really adamant. She basically, her eyesight is going, and she pretends that she can see, and we were doing a jigsaw together, and she looked at it and she goes, "What does that say?" And it's a massive, like a chocolate bar. And I'm like, you can't read that. Sometimes she does this now, where she'll say, "Oh, what does this say?" And I'll say, "Well, why don't you tell me what this says?" And she'll also sometimes, and this is the thing as well with dementia, your personality changes. It can change, and so she is a bit snappier than she used to be. And sometimes somebody will be talking to her, and she'll say, "Stop mumbling," because she's also going deaf. But she refuses to admit that any of these things, because I think for her that admission, that has more significance than just. It would make such an improvement to her life if she did admit it, but she's too stubborn not to. And I hope that, because I can be stubborn, and I hope that I don't. I can't put myself in her shoes realistically, but yeah, I mean, I can imagine the admitting that you're getting too old. It could be scary, but I think that I'm also. Yeah, I think that this has helped me come to terms more with aging and with dying, because I look at her and I'm like, well, this is going to be me one day, so treat her like it's going to be you one day. But I hope that I will be a lot healthier than her at that age, because I'm making conscious efforts now to be healthy, and I'm also a lot more. I don't know what the word is. I live in. I suppose I live in reality a lot more, where I don't delude myself, and that could be a delusion in itself. But I face up to the facts usually, and then I go, right, well, what can I do about this? What can I change to make sure this doesn't keep happening, rather than just pretending something isn't happening? So hopefully it'll be different for me. I'll feed back to you in 80 years time, or hopefully I can live to 100. That'd be cool. Well, it would be cool if it was a healthy 100, but I don't want to be hooked up to a life support machine and just living for the sake of living, Yeah. Like, I think But I think I'm also, in terms of dying, it's something that always is important to think about, because I think that people often avoid the idea of death, and I think I'm coming to terms with it, with the fact that I'm going to die at some point, more and more. And I think it's something I'm always going to have to think about, but I want to get it out of the way early, because I know that my parents are sort of in that stage of life where they're starting to go, oh God, we're going to get old, or we are getting old, and we're going to die. And I kind of don't want to have that, where I want to be fully aware of my mortality and just live life, just because, I don't know, I think it's important to come to terms with it, so that you don't live all of your life in with an ever so slight fear of what's coming over the horizon. And I've died in a few dreams recently, and I have, so for context, I have very, very vivid dreams that I sort of live whole stories and lives in these dreams, and it's really fun. And then sometimes in those dreams something happens. It's almost like that Rick and Morty episode where they plug into the machine and then they live a whole life. And so I'll live these really fun stories, and sometimes I die in them. Or so one of them, I was in a car and somebody crashed the car off of a cliff, and we were just free falling, and I was in the car, and I was like, damn, this is it. I have 5 to 10 seconds before I hit the floor and I'm going to die. And I actually felt quite peaceful in that moment. I went, oh, okay. Well, this isn't ideal, but this is how it ends, and that's it. So and I've had other times where I've died, and actually I also felt peaceful in those moments. And I've heard that you get that your body releases those chemicals, your brain releases those chemicals to make you hallucinate when you die. And I think that final dream, whatever it's going to be, that it is going to be sick. I think it's going to be a really good dream. And some people have that theory of oh, what if you're living that dream right now? And it's you know what? Yeah, sure. Because for some reason, when you're dreaming, your perception of time completely changes, and you live a whole, you live this really long story out in your brain. So, yeah, I think it actually, the whole experience of dying is not as bad as I once thought. And I would also want to have quite a positive death, where, I guess everyone does, but I would say, if I was on my deathbed and surrounded by loved ones, that would be great, for one. But two, I would want to make that moment more about them, about how I could improve their lives one last time, and then just sort of go, okay guys, see you later, make the most of your life, love you lots, bye bye. Yeah, this has been I was not expecting this conversation to go this way. This conversation, I'm talking to the voices in my head, yeah. So, I guess another thing I've been thinking about these past couple of weeks, not thinking about, a couple of successes I've had, which have made me think about just the value of learning to code. I've talked about it before, and it's almost self-explanatory, but it feels good because I'm reaching a point where what I've learned in the past few months, I'm able to actually use productively in the workplace, and actually outside the workplace as well, to create programs that are actually useful. And yeah, this felt good. So some examples, I've started in work, so I had a real ego stroking moment. So the context is, I've learned to code in Python. I can't code in anything else, or at least I've not been taught to. And my workplace is very digitalized, but it uses Airtable, which is a very powerful database platform, and you can run scripts in there, and you can do quite a lot within it. But the issue is that these scripts, you have to write them in JavaScript, and so I basically did a very simple project, and it was doing, it was calculating the distance between any given any given like target and a client, like a given address by a client. Basically, they want to know the distance between two locations, and that's something that we just do normally by hand. Just get Google Maps out, just copy and paste. But that sort of thing, the time can rack up, and across multiple projects, across multiple people as well on the team. And I was doing it myself and just went, you know what? I'm kind of sick of this. So I've just learned how to use APIs. So I was like, right, I'm going to figure out just see if I can do this. And I managed to program in JavaScript using ChatGPT and Stack Overflow to come up with a program that requests from this API and then updates cells in the Airtable. And it took me a lot longer than it should have. It is an easy program to write, but when you don't know how to speak the other language, it's quite difficult, because ChatGPT, I've sort of tempered my expectations from it a bit. I think maybe using Copilot would be a bit better, but what I've noticed with ChatGPT is obviously it doesn't actually understand what you're asking it to do. So what I found is that it usually just copies an example. It just copies from Stack Overflow like a problem that someone has, and it can't use an understanding of the wider language from other documentation to then fix to customize your problem. So if you go, right, well, I understand what you've done, but you need to change it because my problem is this, and this, and you've done that, and that. And it's not able, it'll go, oh, okay, I see. And then it'll give you the same block of code because it doesn't have that sort of creative aspect to it, which is fine, but, it makes it a lot harder to use at the moment. And I driven myself, I was slamming my head into the desk repeatedly. I was like, I'm done with this thing. And I got to this point where I was like, okay, I give up. I'm going to come back to it another day. So I started tinkering with it while I was at work, and I was like, okay, I'll just look at it for 10 minutes. And, this is the thing, is that as much as I was really frustrated, I do really enjoy coding. And it's not that I want to do it for like a career or anything like that, but I enjoy the problem solving, and I get sucked into it where it's like, okay, I was supposed to do this for 10 minutes. Oops, it's now been an hour. Because I really enjoy it, and I just get lost in, I don't know, the time just sort of disappears and I just get lost in it. And I managed to, I was like, right, I'm going to approach this much more systematically. I just started reading the documentation, looking at every single bit of code that ChatGPT was giving me and saying, okay, well, what does this variable do? What is the point of this? What does that do? And by really interrogating it, I managed to actually figure out how to change it. And I just had this really big ego stroking moment at work where I slammed the enter key, and one by one, all of these cells started populating driving distance. And I was like, yes! And I said, guys, look at this. And everyone was crowding around going, whoa, how do you do that? Because no one else can code. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I'm pretty good, I guess. And it felt really good in that moment. Like that high that I felt so elated that I'd managed, like, not that I'd shown it to everyone, but just that I'd managed to get it working, and it felt really, really rewarding. And so in terms of my next project, my next one is I'm going to basically create I'm going to use ChatGPT it's a tool to basically, you give it some inputs and then ChatGPT turns it into a sentence, turns it into something that's a bit more structured. And the idea here is to basically, it's got to be tested and stuff, but the idea here is to make the most quality individualized outreach that is you try to minimize the time input to get it done, because then, as I've sort of talked about before, what I want to do is I want to massively increase my response rates, increase my effectiveness for the work that I do, but then also reduce the time that it takes to do the work. So, just get these big jumps in productivity and overall just improvements in, I suppose, in success rates. And the final thing that I've programmed is, it was part of the course that I was doing, was basically you sending like daily text reminders using Twilio. And it kind of got me thinking, because it was a text reminder of basically, remember to bring a coat, or bring an umbrella because it's going to rain today or whatever. And I did that text reminder and I kind of went, do you know what? I think I could use this for something. And I decided to calculate how many days. I made like an arbitrary date of when I was going to quit my job. And that's not because I hate my job. To the contrary, I actually am really enjoying it. I think that I could potentially do very, very well in it. But what I was thinking of is that basically, I've been working for like over a month, and I sort of realized one day, I was like, I feel like I'm becoming complacent. I feel that I'm getting too comfortable, and that's not an issue, right? Because being comfortable is good in one sense. It's like, right, well, that means I'm enjoying it. I'm getting on with everyone. But to caveat it, I don't want to become complacent where I sit there and I just kind of go, oh, well, I'm working the 9 to 5. Oops, look, 5 years has passed. What the fuck is going on? Oh, wait, I had all these ambitions and I kind of forgot to live them out because I got too comfortable. And so what I've done is I've basically done this text reminder, and it felt good because I got to use some of it. I did stuff that was outside of the project. So I started, basically it was very simple stuff, but just like a text file that stores the data of how many days I got left, and then it literally just gets reduced by 1 every day, and then you save it right over the file, and then you can just access it the next day. But what this means is that every morning about 6:30 I get a text saying you have this number of days left till you quit your job, and then also give me some like daily affirmations as well, that just sort of just saying like important stuff to me, where I go, oh yeah, good, that's good to read, because I'm trying to do daily affirmations anyway, so it's kind of good to like read it out loud. And actually, no, so I haven't been reading out loud, but I think I'm going to do it because that reinforces it even more. And I think that it's because I want to make sure that every day, I want to make every day count, and I want to go in going, right, let's get value out of today because I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go start my own business. And it kind of pressures me, and it makes me, because I work well under pressure, so it's like, right, well, having that sense of this isn't permanent, I think is useful for me. But to go back to what I was talking about before with AI, I've just read The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, and I have also promised, so I'm reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People as well. I'm still reading that. It's taken a lot longer than I was expecting, and the reason for that is because it's a self-help book, but it's the kind of self-help book where you can't just read it. Oh, I guess with all self-help books, you're not really supposed to just read it, but it's the kind of book where I'm trying to almost interact with it and really interrogate each section and implement it, because it is a very useful book. And I've slowed down a lot because I was at a point where I was writing. You had to almost write like your own personal constitution and your own values and things like that. And that was not saying I wanted to rush. And normally I speed read as well. So the amount of, I probably could have finished the book in 2 weeks if I didn't take notes. But taking notes and thinking and writing is significantly slowed that down. But I think I'm getting a lot more value out of it as a result. And I think I can talk, the way that I'll talk about it will be a lot better afterwards. But yeah, so I've read the Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, which is basically a book about AI, and he calls it The Coming Wave, because it's unstoppable, really, and he brings it as like it's in biblical proportions, where he starts off talking about all the different myths of how Earth was sort of destroyed in a wave, and then in like a great flood or whatever. And yeah, it's quite a depressing book. And I say that, like, it balances the potential of AI a lot. Like it definitely it gets you excited about it. But the thing is that it's more of a warning, because he says, look, it's well documented that this is going to have great benefits. And I'm not saying it's not going to, but I think that the risks are overlooked. And so I want to focus on the risks, because I think that, like, he calls it like I think it's pessimism aversion, where people just kind of, they just pretend that everything's going to be okay, and it's like almost delusional. And they say, oh, no, technology is good, it's just always good. And he kind of makes the point, he makes a lot of very good points, but what he talks about is how technology is, if you look at just the way that it spreads, apart from, say, nuclear technology, usually the way that it works is a new technology comes along, it starts off in the hands of the few, and then it starts to, because the actual economy is decentralized, so is the production and diffusion of technology. And what happens is it starts off expensive, but inevitably the costs come down, the use of it becomes more widespread, and he kind of looks at, say, something like the printing press, which was something that some governments around the world tried to control, and they completely failed to control it, because it's because you, even if you control it within your own borders, you can't really influence what's going on too far around the world. And even if you try and control it within your own borders, people can still just use technology, because a centralized force cannot control to that extent. It's something that is as diffuse as that is just not possible. So that's how he starts, kind of talking about the diffusion of technology and how it's inexorable, and it's written into our capitalist society, that because technology is produced in the pursuit of profit, first it allows technology to advance. So this is obviously a benefit of capitalism, that we are able to, through this decentralized system, we're able to continually grow, but it's now almost out of any individual's hands. It's very difficult to stop. And the issue with that is that the pursuit of profit is not obviously the same thing as the pursuit of societal good. And this is not like I hate capitalism or anything. I don't. I think capitalism has, you just can't deny that it's done some amazing things. There's a statistic that he says, I think, at the turn of near the end of the 18th century, 90% of the world was in extreme poverty, and today about 10% of the world is, or I think it's like 6% even. It's low, okay? It's rising at the moment, but it's low. And that's because of capitalism. So yeah, I'm not saying capitalism is evil, but the thing is that because of that decentralized nature, it's very difficult to control. And why is that important? Well, because he talks about AI, and essentially it is a decentralized, it is an extremely powerful technology that is going to become accessible to anybody. The example he gave was, I think it was ChatGPT, or it was one of the most powerful large language models in the world. It could be run on a $50 laptop. So, and obviously development of the technology is still expensive, but again, all of the cost of these things come down, and the cost of developing AI technologies is coming down extremely rapidly, like to a frightening degree. And I use that word, it's exciting, but it's also frightening for the reason that he gives. And so it's basically that you can't control how people choose to use the technology. And though there are all of these amazing benefits of AI, there are also, in the hands of the wrong people, it can be massively misused. For example, there was an AI system that was developed that could basically come up with new molecules to help heal people. And it came up with thousands and thousands of, it's really useful. And then somebody basically did an experiment, some scientist did an experiment where he went, okay, what if I just change this parameter, a single parameter, I flip it round. And now, instead of trying to maximize the benefit, you're trying to maximize the harm. And he turned this seemingly great technology into it came up with something like 50,000 molecules. I can't remember the time. It was a very short period of time. 50,000 molecules that are lethal. Some of them have never been used before. Things like Novichok, all of that stuff. It was able to just come up with, and then it can then, from that point, synthesize them very easily. And that's with things like biological 3D printing, which is becoming a more and more viable technology. And what does that mean? Well, let's look at, say, the US, where you have, and not even the US, you can have rogue states, you could have Islamic State, terrorist organizations, death cults, for example. And I'll get back to that example in a bit, actually, because that one was absolutely crazy. I'd never even heard of that. But you get a lone school shooter who hates society or whatever, feels really, I suppose, like a victim for whichever reason and wants to get back at the world. So they get out an AR-15 and then kill 30 children or whatever. Imagine if that person could just get a fucking 3D printer and just create the next pandemic. Like, why wouldn't they do that? Why wouldn't they do that? Because you can't control for the crazies. You can't. And if a technology is as diffuse as that, it's like, how do you stop people like that from doing things? How do you stop, say the hackers who shut down the NHS and loads of government institutions for a ransom? How do you stop people like that from using these technologies for ill and for causing, it's basically, you're giving them nukes and it's bad. It's very bad. And the other thing is that, what if somebody uses these technologies and then triggers a nuclear war because they do something that is smart, right? There's so much room for miscalculation. And the thing about the death cult, right? It was a guy at some conference who basically set up a death cult. He started preaching about something, and I can't remember what it was, but gets to this point where they believe that they need to rush humanity to extinction. And I don't remember why. I think they wanted to trigger World War III. I do not remember what it was, but it became this huge cult in Japan. Something like 40,000 people were in it at its peak. It had, and it wasn't like a bunch of shop clerks or something. It was people all across society, and they managed to get strains of, I think it was anthrax, because they had a graduate, like, biochemistry student or something or epidemiology student who basically was able to provide how to make these chemical weapons, and then also was able to steal. It was how to engineer a disease, which they did, but because they didn't engineer it properly, it didn't spread. But what they did was they created a highly virulent, highly deadly disease a second time, and they tried to release it into the Japanese metro, and it was pure chance that this was stopped. Now, imagine, like, say that was like a 70% chance of failing. Imagine in that 30% outcome what the world could have looked like, and imagine how much more effective they could have been if they just used an AI, because it would have picked up on the mistakes that they made in engineering that virus, because there was a small mistake that they made, which meant that it wasn't as virulent, and they weren't able to spread it as well because they had to put it in like bags or something like that. And it was like, what the fuck? What the fuck? Because that happened, so why can't it happen again? Yeah, and it's a scary book. It's a very good book, and it got me thinking a lot about, I guess, the dangers of AI, because I'm aware of the exciting elements of it, but how are we supposed to contain it? And that's his main argument is about containment. But I just don't see the global willpower, I suppose, political also awareness to do something about it. And then even if there was political will, I don't really see how there is the power to do it, because what he lays out these two scenarios of either the technology gets into the hands of everyone and you're setting off all of these low probability, extremely high damage outcomes, and you're just repeatedly triggering them again and again when you put the technology in the hands of everyone, or you create sort of techno-dystopian future where it's almost like say with like the lockdowns over the pandemic. What the point that he makes is, you think that people would not be willing to countenance creating a state that has complete and utter control over everything and potentially even uses AI to put down other AI. You think that people wouldn't be okay with it having that level of intrusion into their life. But if there is some sort of scare, say like with COVID, where suddenly the whole world seems to be shutting down, everyone's getting sick. Governments around the world thought that pandemic lockdowns were impossible. They said it could not be done. The population wouldn't stand for it. But the point that he makes is that in periods of extreme uncertainty and duress, where the wider population does not feel safe, people are willing to accept extreme measures to try and I suppose arrest those issues that could cause a wider societal collapse. And and so it's actually not as far-fetched as it seems. Sorry, and he puts also it through the lens of great power competition, where even now, China and the US, one of their biggest fields of competition is in the development of AI, and almost like trying to, like, he's looking at it from this engineer perspective, but he said there's this theory within the world of AI where basically you can get to a point where, so he calls it there's artificial general intelligence, but he calls it artificial, I think, competent intelligence, where basically the AI specialized for a certain task is able to basically be indistinguishable from, or is able to do things much better than humans in all regards. But, it's not able to do everything. It's just able to, once you give it that narrow lens, it's able to do it. And there's this idea that basically you get, well, it's what they used already. So say we're like AlphaGo. So Mustafa Suleyman is the person who founded DeepMind, who did AlphaGo, and it basically came along and annihilated this human player in Go, and was doing moves that no human player had ever thought of before, and it was extremely creative, new strategies, things like that. Well, what they did this time was, rather than, because they trained AlphaGo on human games of Go, and they came up with a second one who I don't know what it was, I can't remember what it was called, but basically what it did was they didn't train it on, they gave it the rules of Go, but what they did is they got it to play itself they had something like 400 simulations of it playing itself at any one time, going at the same time, and it just kept doing that training. So it was doing like millions of games learning how to play Go, and it completely annihilated AlphaGo. And so it's this idea of getting AI to train itself. And the idea is basically that when you get to that point, we get to a more than exponential rate of increase in the power of computers, and it can basically, just society will completely change once you get to that point. I think maybe it's called the singularity, but I'm not sure. But once a society reaches that point, everything changes. That is basically the idea. And what he is talking about is, within the context of great power competition, that basically all of these countries, it's an arms race. We're already, if you look at the language, we're already in an arms race. And he talks about, say, like the Cold War with nuclear weapons, where basically the US progressed nuclear technology a lot out of fear that the Russians were ahead of them. And there was this whole scare about how, I can't remember what basically the Soviet Union would lie about, it lied about everything, but it would lie about its capabilities as well. And so the US believed that they were at a ICBM disadvantage, and they said, oh, okay, the Soviets have ICBMs and we don't. And it's been shown actually at that point where the US started getting scared about that stuff, it had something like 100 times nuclear advantage over the Soviet Union. and then it went into this hyperdrive mode in trying to accelerate its nuclear weapons programs out of fear of the Soviets. And he's basically saying, the language shows we're kind of already at that point between the US and China. And where the US is, say, restricting exports of chips to China, it's doing so with a mind of slowing its progression in the AI field, because it is doing. If you look at AI has been a focus for the Chinese for a long time, and so it's something like half of all papers in the world are published by Chinese authors. And what the US is doing is it's trying to, because these chips are necessary for development of advanced AI, they're trying to slow that progression. And I suppose it's a race to the singularity, which is kind of scary, kind of very scary. Yeah, and we'll see, because this whole idea that the Chinese model, I mean, I personally think the Chinese model, because it is becoming overly centralized again, it's destined to lose. But if it's overly centralized, is there such a thing as overly centralized? Because for humans, we can't manage. Like, we know that we can't manage the complex needs and just, any given economy is far too complex for any group of humans to manage. But what if there's an AI who gets all of the data inputs and is now able to command and control effectively because it can understand and process everything at the same time? I don't know if that's true, but the Chinese are moving towards this increasingly centralized model, having like social credit scores and looking at Xinjiang, like what they have done there. And I know it's different because they're doing basically a genocide against it looks like that holiday to China is I'm putting that on pause. Probably never going there again, but I say again, I'm never going there ever, because I don't want to get arrested and have my social credit score is low right now. But the stuff that they're doing there in terms of giving everyone social credit scores, analyzing their every move on the internet, they are completely surveilled. Well, why wouldn't they expand that to all of China? And I know obviously they're not, I don't think they would put everyone in China in camps because they're not insane. They want control. But why would they not perfectly survey everybody? Because they already have all the tools are in place, really. The internet is not free in China. It is all monitored. And so potentially it is an answer to the economic model, the liberal economic model that we've worked on. I don't know, but I think that it depends. It all depends on the next. I think the next decade is crucial, because the way I see it is at the moment the Chinese economy is stagnating, but they do have the resources that if they were to funnel everything into AI development, then perhaps all of those problems could be fixed. I don't know, and maybe AI is overhyped. Maybe it's not the panacea that we think it is, but it's kind of put the struggle in a new lens for me, because I kind of was at this point where I went, you know what, looking at the Chinese economy, I don't think that they have it. I think that they've had a great run, but they look like they're entering the middle income trap. And looking at their birth rates, they are facing a massive demographic crisis, which is really going to start affecting their economy. And so they will overtake the US in short order, but I don't think they'll stay there, because the US has been on a very steady trajectory over a very long time, and it benefits from immigrants, which it still benefits from immigrants, but there is an anti-immigrant backlash, to be fair. But that being said, what's going on is is this AI piece, I think, changes that calculus somewhat, which is also, it's scary because it means that there's more of a long-term challenge, but it's kind of good, because if the Chinese don't believe that this is be all and end all, and they are like, okay, well, development of AI is still a potential out for us, maybe the Communist Party and Xi Jinping don't resort to gunboat diplomacy to essentially to continue to have popular support, which is always possible. And Gunboat diplomacy, by the way, is basically where you start doing sort of like brinkmanship, where you're basically going about and you're using force to get what you want. And brinkmanship is another thing where you're pushing to the edge of war to get concessions. But the main point really for them would be domestic, which often happens particularly in dictatorships. You've seen it in Vladimir Putin's Russia, where as things are stagnating at home and they're not performing as well, they distract people with ventures abroad. And for the Communist Party, they've never let go of the Taiwan dream of the reunification of China. And since they've never let go of it, well, in fact, they've re-emphasized it. Xi Jinping has said, within my premiership, we will reunite this, which is he's staking his reputation on that. And they can always just silence everybody and delete all evidence that was ever said. But you can't silence what's in people's heads. You can't silence that. And so to a certain extent, his ego is on the line. And that's not a good thing for a dictator. It's not a good thing for when gambling on a dictator, because when their ego's on the line, they're not going to make rational decisions. And yeah, in this situation, if he needs to distract from what's going on at home, he will go for it, because he wants to, they need to stay in power. That is the single objective of the Communist Party, is to stay in power, whatever the cost. And to have control, to stop, but then it's to have control, but that is only to serve the end that they want to stay in power. And yes, and when you look at the military reports, the American government has said that they do not want, that they cannot defend Taiwan. They do military exercises, they do war games, and at the moment in the simulations, they have now tipped in favor of China, because the thing is, China has massed force, and not only does it have massed force, and that means it has all of its ships, all of its navy in one centralized location, which means that for America to match it, America's navy is spread across the world, and so America would have to concentrate all of its forces in the Pacific, which is what they're trying to do. But there's just so many issues, because they have been the global hegemon for so long. They don't want to exert influence everywhere. They kind of have to have this trade-off of, right, if we face off with China, we have to accept losing influence. That if we want to keep Taiwan independent, we have to accept losing influence in other places. And that's just a fact, unfortunately, because China is modernizing at a rapid pace. Its military build-up is significant, and the other advantage that it has is that although it is something like a 100, like it is a significant crossing, like Taiwan is not actually that close to China, but it's a lot further to America, and for the Americans to support any sort of defense of Taiwan, they would need to be based in, say, Okinawa, I think it's the Senkaku Islands in Japan, or in what's it called, Guam. And those are both far away as well. So the only way, really, of stopping that calculation because at the moment America can't defend them. They can make it bloody, but they couldn't stop the Chinese from just taking the island. And the Taiwanese are going to have to wake up to that at some point, because they live in a bit of a fantasy world where they still act as if they're like a technologically superior power to China, and they're not. China is now a superpower, and they've got to do something about that. And something that The Economist has written about is this idea of a porcupine strategy, where they just need to make it as indigestible as possible, so that the cost is too high. And the way of doing that is small distributed arms across the country, things that are low cost, having loads of ammunition, kind of like what Ukraine has done, really, where using smart, cost-effective methods of warfare, to make any invasion of the island just extremely difficult. Because the problem is, if you have all this advanced equipment, it's really useful. It is useful, but only if it doesn't get destroyed. And it's hard to replace. You can't just if you've got 50 fighter jets, oh, that's great. But if the Chinese have 200 fighter jets, well, it doesn't matter because you're going to lose your fighter jets, and then you've lost all your investment is all gone. So you need to have, light arms, things that can destroy tanks. And this is all from my understanding of it, right? This is not. I'm not a military analyst. However, I'm just saying it how I understand it. So yeah, I think that is actually something that scares me a little bit. Is the whole Taiwan situation, because I think that is a very strong point or pressure point for, I guess flashpoint is the word. Yeah, flashpoint of global tension, where the UK could get pulled in. It's sort of one of those things where a world war situation could occur based around that single flashpoint, and it's scary. So maybe AI offers a way out, and it means that the next 10 years are not just a period of stagnation for China, and not just a period of, okay, well, we're going to have to fucking go, or we're never going to catch up to the US. I don't know, but it's a uncertain world that we're heading into, and since I'm young, I'm going to have to live through all of it. I do wonder whether, I've been trying to think of ways of actually how you could contain it, and I don't know whether it would work, but like having almost like some sort of virus that you put inside all of the AI that is in itself an AI that is trying to, its objective is to stay within the code, and then, it's almost like a, I don't know, but potentially some sort of safety switch where the creators of, because I imagine that developing AI is going to be still hard, whereas maybe having access to the AI will be easy. And if that is the case, then perhaps the developers, there could be some sort of standard of, right, they need to have within all AI technology something that's hard coded, like some sort of evolving virus that can have like a shutdown mechanism built within it, and its sole objective is to stay alive. And it means that, say you ask an AI that has this written into it, write me an AI without it, well, even if it tries to, the virus overrides it and codes itself into the other AI, and then it means that there are potentially rules or something like that this virus prevents the other AI from breaking. I don't know whether it would work, and I don't know whether that's possible because I guess code itself is static, so it might be possible to remove it, but yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. And I suppose I don't have to know because it's not my job. I'm not the guy in the room. But if you're an advanced AI policymaker and you're listening to this, let me know if that works. Okay, that is all for this week. Thank you for listening, and yeah, I will get back to you guys next week with the remaining half of this episode. Cheers. Have a good week. Bye bye.